morning. Welcome to Books at the Bottom of the Stairs. My name's Lorene. If you're new, welcome, and if you're a returning viewer, welcome back so much. I am going to talk a little bit about Hurricane Lee. It came through. We didn't have too much trouble in our house, no flooding in the basement, which was very nice. It does happen from hurricane to hurricane. No trees down in our neighborhood. We were without power for about close to 24 hours, I think. And we had left some of our storm preparedness items back at the camp. So we did okay here, but it turns out that the camp had a tree come down on the bunkhouse, but we're not sure. We think it's kind of resting on another tree and is sort of between this other tree and a beam. So we're hoping that there hasn't been any damage. We're going tomorrow, so I'll tell you all about it next week. And we didn't have any trouble with the boats and so on. So for us, it was a very painless hurricane. You just never know. You know, get all prepared because it can go either way. It can be a complete non-event depending on just where the winds go, and other times it can be just a gong show. So yeah, we were lucky this time. In terms of reading, because there was the power outages, I was initially thinking, I can go shopping online. I can do some, I can do some cheer me up book buying. But there wasn't any internet, so I wasn't able to do that. And in the course of, fluttering around going, where's my internet? I spied my knitting pile, and I thought, oh, I'll also just see what sweaters I have finished and, where I have holes in the spectrum of colors for knitting sweaters. And I went up into my wardrobe and pulled out the fall and the winter and did this whole thing, and realized I really only need to want to knit one sweater, and thought, I know where I can get that wool. So I was waiting anxiously for the internet to come back so I could order some wool. So I don't have a book haul coming. I will eventually have a yarn haul coming, and I know you're just all dying to see that. In the terms of book reading, it was again a bit of a challenge because it was so overcast and couldn't really get any lighting to go. So what I ended up doing was not reading the books I really had planned to, but reading things that were easier reads, but also had bigger printing. Especially about 4 o'clock. That's when things really started to dim down, and there's still lots of leaves on the trees, so we were, getting well, there wasn't any sun to get shade from, but it was just part of the gloom, I guess. So I read 3 books, 2 of which I really loved, and 1 I'm a little on the fence about. The first one that I was reading was a finish-up book. It's Dangerous Ages, and it's Rose Macaulay as the author. This is part of the British Library Women Writers series that I've been working through. About 60% of what they have published I have purchased. And this one, some books you just have to read. Some books are not good as the I'll read that at breakfast time book. And I usually have one, I'll read it at breakfast. I usually have another one that I'm reading at bedtime, and then another one that I'm kind of reading through the day. And quite often there's a nonfiction lurking somewhere in all of that. So Dangerous Ages, I think, is meant to be a kind of a comedic look at women separated by about 20 years each. So we've got the main character whose name is Neville. She's 43, and so it's also like a matrilineal line. So Neville is the daughter of Mrs. Macaulay. Mrs. Macaulay is 63, and then Neville has a sister who's maybe about 10 years younger or so. No, I'm sorry, she has a sister who's about 10 years younger, but then she has a daughter who's just coming into her 20s. So we see sort of a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 60-year-old, and then there's also Grandma Macaulay who's 83. So it's fun to see these different women across the different age groups. And it's interesting to see them confronting this period of time. It's about a 6-month period of time. There isn't anything in particular happening plot-wise, it's more episodes in a family and how they are viewing them and viewing each other. And some people have respect for each other, and some people have nothing but great disdain for each other. And it really informs their relationships, but it also really informs how they see themselves when compared. So there's a daughter-in-law that Neville, I guess she would be a sister-in-law to Neville. She sees this woman with great scorn and makes life choices so that she can be nothing like that lady. And Mrs. Macaulay looks at both her daughter Neville and Grandma Macaulay and cannot understand either of them in terms of their life choices. Neville has decided she'd like to go back to get her doctor's degree. She's the wife of a politician, and she doesn't want to do that anymore. The kids are growing up, and she, her husband can manage for himself, but she can't find her place in the world. Mrs. Macaulay's never found her place in the world. She's always referenced herself in terms of her husband who's died and a son who's not very much in the picture, and just can't really be her own person. She's a fairly undereducated, but yeah, she's educated for her times, but she just has not used her brain very much for anything. Whereas Grandma Macaulay, she's having a great time. She's pretty much come to terms with her age and where she is in society and where she is in the community and her relationship back to the earlier generations. And so she's quite satisfied. And so we see Grandma's satisfaction in relationship to the women in her lives. And she's kind of a rock in a way, although people still don't really want to be like Grandma. They just see her as the end point. And so the journey is to maybe become like Grandma, but not right now. How do you avoid becoming Grandma right now? And so Neville decides that she wants to go back and pick up her medical studies, which she gave up upon marrying her husband. And it's a challenge. She has been underutilizing her brain. She's very good socially, but she just doesn't see herself in that milieu anymore. Her sister Nan has been a writer all these years and has been sort of walking alongside a man who she will not get into relationship with. She just sees that as settling. And then when she finally is ready to settle, he has opted for her niece, so Neville's daughter. And so there's that whole 20-year-old la love, and Neville's kind of, what's that word? Jaded approach to what love and partnership is all about. Neville's kind of fatigued with it all. Mrs. Macaulay's grieving that she can't have it anymore because that was the only thing that defined her. And Grandma, I'm not sure she even remembers her husband, Anyways, Mrs. Macaulay gets into the reading of the Freudian, what do you call that? The hype of Freud at the time of this writing of this book. And she really gets into it, but misunderstands a lot of it. And the others are either sort of supportive of Freud and his ideas or completely scornful. And so I think reading it in a burst, you would get all these trails and all these connections, and you would get the sort of spiraling Freudian bits and pieces that are either very poorly understood or very well understood. And that's where the humor comes in, is when you see how Mrs. Macaulay interprets it and how what's her name now? Gerda, the youngest of them all, interprets it. And so, yeah, I really struggled to see the humor. I found Mrs. Macaulay to be just the moaningest, dreariest of characters. Neville, I was a little disappointed in. She, like her mom, just can't seem to get her head around where she wants to go. So, whereas the younger generations seem to have a better sense of who they are and where they can go. Yeah, so it was interesting. It's taking place in 1939 and was published in the, no, how is that possible? 1920s, I'm sorry, it's in the 1920s, but I think it was published in 39, yeah. So, interesting. I think I would recommend it if you could pay attention to it. Okay, the other two books that I read, Echo Mountain by Lauren Wolk is a middle grade book. The protagonist is about 12 years old. They've moved during the Great Depression to a mountain that is probably in the Appalachians or Virginia, somewhere down that way. And Ellie has really taken to it. She really gets into the wood cutting and the folklore and the herb lore and the challenges of living on the mountains, whereas her mom and her sister really are town women and really struggling to do more than their duty and quite angry about it. But I mean, the Depression hit so many families, there really was not much that they could do about it. And Dad has been hit by a tree and is unconscious in the bedroom, and so they have to make do without Dad. And so there's all those kinds of challenges. And then up higher on the mountain is a woman who's considered the sort of mountain hag, and yet she has many surprises. Ellie gets involved with her in terms of the healing. It's quite catastrophic in terms of how she gets there and what she has to do, and she learns quite a lot. I really liked this. It was beautifully portrayed in terms of the characters and the setting and the challenges that Ellie had to do. And the parents aren't often included in middle grade books, but we really see Mom and her issues about having this comatose husband and looking after 3 kids in a way that she's really completely unskilled to do. We get to know the neighbors a little bit, who are, some are welcoming and some are. It's a really good community book, and a very good book in terms of girl empowerment, and if that's even a thing, I think it is. And you know, it has got this dad who's poorly, but Ellie's able to look beyond this. This isn't the single issue in her life, so it's not one of those one-line books, and it's got a good set of complex plots, and I think it's very well done. She's also written Wolf Hollow and Beyond the Bright Sea, and the Wolf Hollow was a Newbery Honor book, and Beyond the Bright Sea was a Scott Odell winner for historical fiction. So I think she looks like a good author to follow through on. Okay, I don't know, I haven't spoken very much about Reading Across Canada, and that's by Jolene at Bookworm Adventure Girl. And I have not been participating the way I had hoped to, but this month is taking place in Prince Edward Island. Yeah, that's a whole lot of information you don't know. If I have time at the end, I'll explain it. Okay, so in order to participate this month, the setting is Prince Edward Island, and to read a Lucy Maud Montgomery book. And I pretty much have read all of the Anne of the Island series and Emily of Blue Moon, and I think 1 or 2 others. But this was new to me, Jane of Lantern Hill. It's very charming. And Jane has grown up her whole life believing that her father is dead. He turns out to be alive in Prince Edward Island and has written to her mother, who is single momming it in Toronto, to send Jane his way. Well, Mom's life she's hardly a single mom. She lives with her mother and her aunt, and she has like money coming out of her ears. There's a lot of privilege in Jane's life in Toronto, whereas by the time she gets to Prince Edward Island, she's not impoverished or anything. It's more realistic. It's a more plausible lifestyle. It's more the kind of lifestyle that you and I would be able to figure out. She learns how to cook and look after the house and develop a relationship with her dad. She has a friend that she had in Toronto who's a foundling, and they keep writing letters back and forth. And there's a nice ending for Jody back in Toronto. There are there cousins? No, there are no cousins in Prince Edward Island, but there's lots of children in the neighborhood. So she starts to, for the first time in her life, have a group of friends that aren't being completely overwatched and overmanaged by Grandma back in Toronto. So it's a very charming not coming of age, coming of self kind of story, and she learns to stand her own 2 feet in order to go back to Toronto and deal with grandma, and also push her mom a little bit. So the ending is a bit dramatic, and are things solved from Jane's point of view, or are they still kind of at loose ends? I can't tell you. I really enjoyed this, and I was very glad to have Lucy. I do really enjoy Lucy Maud Montgomery as an author, so I was very glad to have her as the author to read for this month. So reading across Canada from Jolene is each province is featured in a month. So 12 provinces and territories, and so each month a different province or territory. So we're working our way. September is Prince Edward Island. August was Nova Scotia. October is going to be Newfoundland and Labrador. And then I think we head to Iqaluit, but I'm not positive. And there's a theme set for each month. And Nova Scotia was holiday, and Newfoundland Labrador is going to be an author born there. And so, which is kind of interesting, because I've read a fair amount from Newfoundland, but I'm not sure they were born there. So it means having to do a little bit of research. Now, Jolene does an episode every month beforehand to give recommendations and some author suggestions. So I will link her in the doobly-doo below, and you can go and see her information. That's great, because in the process of following her on this, I've learned about a whole bunch of authors, and well, and also just books I wouldn't have heard. You know, sometimes you hear about an author, but if a book isn't associated with that author, it drifts off my brain. So I have a couple of books that I have tagged and written down that I would like to read come next year. So I have signed up for Jolene's online book club, which will be commencing, I guess we'll start reading in October. So if you're looking for an online book club, I think I can recommend this. I really like Jolene. She's a wonderful lady, and very, very, very good in her critical analysis of what she reads. So I think that will be fun. Well, that's it for me today. I hope all your reading dreams and adventures continue to come true, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye for now.